And I am going to record because I did not do that 2 minutes ago. I'm coming to you live from Toronto, known as Toronto, which can be translated from Mohawk to English as meaning to gather people. So here we are, gathered remotely. Tonight, you are muted, but please add your questions to the chat room and we will answer as many as we can, probably around 8 o'clock. Please be advised as well that I've now pressed the recording button. And so please keep those socks on. And the video will be posted next week on the Mattawa River Writers Festival website. So producing the In Conversation series is a way to retain our connections with our natural world through the arts, which I believe is more important than ever, given after all these many months of uncertainty, stress, and sorrow. Aging and elder care is in the news every day, along with the physical and mental need for the outdoors. And this combination is why Moira Welsh and Gil Penalosa are in dialogue tonight. Moira is an investigative journalist with the Toronto Star. She's co-authored investigations that have won 3 national newspaper awards and a Michener Award for public service journalism. She started as a breaking news reporter and soon joined the investigative team, where she has written on social justice, the environment, and the lives of people living in seniors' homes. She finished writing Happily Ever Older during the pandemic. Jan Arden, you thought she was here, huh? I invited her, but she said, every single person in this country needs to read this book. Welsh has somehow managed to give hope to something that for the most part seems hopeless. So Jan, your ears are burning, that's why. So welcome, Moira. Tonight, you'll be in conversation. This feels like James game show moment. You'll be in conversation with Gil Penalosa. Gil is passionate about creating cities for all people, vibrant cities and healthy communities for everyone, regardless of age and social, economic, or ethnic background. Gil is the founder and chair of the internationally recognized Canadian nonprofit organization, 880 Cities. He is also first ambassador of World Urban Parks, president of G. Penalosa and Associates, and recently he created our third act, Older, Healthier, and Happier. Gil was included in Planet Design's top 100 most influential urbanists and recently received in Australia the World Urban Parks Annual Distinguished Individual Award. He has worked in over 350 different cities and in all continents. And I hope that you and Moira will join us in person in the future alongside the shores of the Mattawa River. But before we begin, I'd like to try something. Everyone, please close your eyes. Zoom out for a moment. Remember a time when you were next to a body of water, river, lake, or an ocean. Can you hear it? Can you feel the waves in your body? Has your heart slowed a little? Maybe a smile has emerged. A memory of being outdoors is not the same strength as being in nature, but I ask you to hold on to that feeling while you're with us tonight. And you can open your eyes or not. So now, Moira, I'd like you to begin with how you came to write about long-term care and ultimately deciding to travel across North America and Europe to find other approaches to elder care.
Thank you, Janet. As an investigative reporter with the Toronto Star, I spent years writing about the abuse and neglect of traditional long-term care homes. Our goal at the Star is to publish investigations that make a difference to improve the lives of society's most vulnerable. My first investigation in 2003 led to the political promise of a revolution, which of course turned out to be an incremental at best. And after years of writing stories on the horrors of bad care with little tangible change to show for it, I really realized something wasn't working. But it took a debate with an editor to change my path forward. Then find a good home, he said, after I told him I couldn't write the same story over and over again with no improvements in sight. And that is how I discovered the transformation of a dementia household from an institution to a home of warmth, friendship, and fun in the region of Peel. In the summer of 2018, after the Star published my story on that transformation, readers responded with such excitement to the idea that long-term care could enable people to flourish that it inspired me to seek out new ways to live well in our later years. And as it turned out, Jack David, the publisher of ECW Press, was also curious. So in the fall of 2018, I began traveling across North America and into the Netherlands. Let me explain something about nursing homes that most of us do not consider. In many homes, residents rarely, if ever, go outdoors. The reality of this hit me when I was in a town called Wies, just outside of Amsterdam, visiting De Hogevik, an enclosed village that operates as a nursing home. At De Hogevik, people with advanced dementia live in small homes of 6 or 7 people and have the freedom to open the door and step outside for a walk. There are gardens and pathways of flowers or trees and a courtyard where there are cafe tables, so residents can sit with others, much like they did in their earlier years. Eloy van Haal, who helped design the village model, told me about the importance of freedom, the ability to step outdoors as one wishes, go for a walk inside the village. At the end of our tour, I asked him what he meant when he spoke about the need to feel a breeze on skin or the sun on our face. And he said, it is to feel alive. In my final visit to a senior's home, I went to a forest in North Carolina. Carroll Woods Retirement Community is built within 120 acres of soaring oak trees. It has 500 residents living in a mix of townhomes, cottages, condos, and skilled nursing, which is much like a nursing home. Volunteering is big here, so residents run 80 different committees, but the overarching goal of Carroll Woods is to create an inclusive community for those residents who are living with cognitive impairment. In most homes, those people would be kept indoors, usually in a locked unit. At Carroll Woods, those who wish to are outside digging gardens, moving around stones, and planting new flowers. If a resident with cognitive decline seems unsure, the other residents and staff have learned to casually help out without making it an issue. As a result, many of those people who are living with cognitive decline have freedom of movement. Instead of pushing against a locked door, unable to step outside their unit, let alone step outdoors, here, people spend time in nature. The CEO of Carroll Woods is a woman named Pat Sprigg. She told me the story of a man, a resident with dementia, who spent his career in the CIA. Now, many people with cognitive decline relive the vibrant years of their past as if they were happening in real time. So every morning, Pat Sprigg said, he went for a walk through the forest. Usually he walked for about an hour, often longer. Resident volunteers walked with him, giving him his space, but ensuring he didn't end up dehydrated. When he finished, Pat said he came to her office and reported on the findings of his patrol. He told her about snipers and shootings, and depending on the day, he told her she was safe to leave her office or recommended she stay. After telling me this story, Pat Sprigg made a powerful point. Can you imagine what he would have been like if he was in a locked unit? It is highly unlikely that he would have been like many others, bored, frustrated, agitated, and possibly very angry. And he likely would have been given antipsychotic drugs to keep him placid. Instead, freedom and nature gave him a normal life. In my book, Happily Ever Older, I write about the rights of older people to live with friendship, spontaneity, and the ability to step outside, to feel the breeze and sun on our skin. It is a natural life at any age. Thank you.
That was, I'm glad you brought up Carol Woods. We have to talk about that more later because that is such an inspiring chapter to look at, and then probably others after they read your book and to go to those websites and to look at those videos. And it's like, yeah, sign me up now. So thank you, Moira. Gil, our third act, older, happier, and healthier, speaks to what I think most of us would desire, but it doesn't seem attainable right now. Would you share with us your work with this? And you have slides to share.
Oh, thank you, Janet. Can you see the slides?
Yes.
Okay. Aging and nature, it's so critical. I want to put things a little bit into context from the point of view of urban. Half of the homes that will be around in 40 years in cities do not exist today. Do not exist. Think about that. Today we have about 3.5 billion people living in cities. Within the lifetime of our children, of our students, we're going to go to 7 billion. And it could be very nice and civilized where people walk and bike and take public transit, and especially where people enjoy nature. People of all ages, from 0 to over 100, should have nature everywhere. Canada's population, we're going to grow by over 7 million in the next 30 years. That is like doing a Toronto, Montreal, Calgary, Ottawa, and Edmonton in 30 years. And I'm talking about cities because almost 9 out of 10 Canadians live in cities of any size. Can be cities of 10,000, 500,000, a million. This is like doing 10 Vancouvers in 30 years, or 2.5 Torontos, or 11 Waterloos. And in the greater Toronto area, fortunately, we have the green belt that we put a limit so that we have nature, also that we densify, otherwise nothing would have worked. We're going to grow by 50% in the GTHA in 25 years. It's a great opportunity, but also a huge responsibility, because whatever we do or don't do is how people are going to live for hundreds of years. So if that is going to happen in the next 40 years, I mean, let's think about this. Is all of Florence, Italy, and one highway intersection at the same scale. It seems like we learn how to do cities, and we then unlearn how to do cities. So cities, they don't decide the population, the what, that's at the national level, but the cities do decide the how. And this is how we've been building cities in the last 40 years. Trees, parks, we've been doing parking lots all over the place. Imagine the life of small children, of older, of people with disabilities that become dependent on someone with a car just to go out for an ice cream. So the last 40 years overwhelmingly has been horrible. I mean, think of the Canadian cities. The overwhelming majority of what we have done in the last 40 years is not sustainable environmentally, is not good for mental or physical health, is not sustainable financially, except with isolated cases like acupuncture. We need to improve the cities that we have today, and we need to create great cities for many, many more people. But we must create cities radically different. Plan them different and manage them differently. It doesn't matter if the city is 2,000 people or 500,000 or 5 million, the issues are the same. We need public transit in the cities of 10,000. We need public transit in the cities of 10 million. The solutions are different. We need parks, we need green, we need trees everywhere. We are having a public health crisis, an equity crisis, and the population growth, and we're living longer, not just in Canadian cities. This is amazing. Look at this. We've been around humans for about 200,000 years. Up until 200 years ago, all of these dots are the countries in the world. 200 years ago, there was not one single country with a life expectancy above 45. Today, we don't have any with a life expectancy below 45. We're living much longer everywhere. In Canada, look what has happened to the life expectancy in Canada. 100 years ago, the life expectancy was 57. Today, it's almost 82. It's 25 years longer. than 100 years ago. Think about for a minute, 25 years longer the life expectancy. Part of it is because fewer children are dying, but also most of it is because we are living longer. And most of it is healthy living years. Some people say, oh yes, but the people are getting very dependent on other people in their 80s. Well, they were used to get dependent in their late 50s. Usually the last 2, 3, 4, 5 years of our life, we start becoming dependent. So most of these additional years are healthy living years. This is amazing. In only 100 years, this is probably the biggest accomplishment almost in the history of humanity that has happened. Nevertheless, people tend to think of this as something negative. Oh, we have too many old people. What? This is amazing. This is so good. Older people are givers. They are not takers. Older are assets to the community, are not liabilities. I just look at this. The line is at 60-year-old. The population pyramid in 1950 is the blue one. Almost most of the population in the world was children and youth. People didn't live very long. Look, in green is current, and then in yellow is how it's gonna be in 50 or 100 years. Of course, we're also thinking about climate change. And when we were thinking how to deal with climate change, even if some don't wanna believe on it, COVID arrived. And some people say everything changed. I don't think much has changed, but our perception changed. It's like if we have gotten some magnifying glasses to see cities, and now even the invisible became visible. With over 80% of the hotel rooms empty, we see all people in tents on the sidewalks, on the streets, on the parks. But also a good point is that with fewer cars, the quality of the air became much better. So do we want to go back to this? Or do we really want a different future? How do we want to live? And post-COVID, I think, has to be around health, equity, and sustainability. That has to be. We really need to work on how older people are going to live healthier and happier with cities that are more equitable and sustainable. That has to be our goal. And older people and cities, we need to live with healthier lifestyles. For example, 5 actions. We need to eat more plant-based. We need to have farmers markets in all of the neighborhoods. We need to have urban gardening. Older people can do urban gardening also with children, and it would become a fantastic tool. We need to sleep more. We need to sleep 7 or 8 hours every day. That's why some older people say, oh, they don't have as much memory. Yes, because some people end up sleeping only 4 or 5 hours. Anybody that sleeps 5 hours a night is not going to have good memory the next day, whether they are 20-year-olds or 60 or 80. So of course, we gotta have a roof over our head. We need to, the place to live has to become a human rights issue. Number 3, we need to socialize on the sidewalks with trees and plants, but also near our homes and in the park, in the green area, we need to socialize. It's so critical. We are talking about loneliness, socializing is critical. 4, we need to have contact with nature and practice mindfulness everywhere, near our home, and the combination of all ages. So contact with nature and mindfulness is critical everywhere. And 5, we need to be physically active. And physically active at all ages, because we're gonna be healthier and happier if we are physical active. And it's not about running marathons, it's about every day. So these 5 actions are critical. And if we're active, by the way, it's gonna decrease our premature death, the strokes, many cancers, heart disease. Older adults, we just need to do 30 minutes, but it has to be 5 days or more per week. So there's an urgency to be physically active. People want a magic pill. No, there is no magic pill. The magic pill is physical activity. And the only way that older Canadians are going to be physically active, the only way is if we walk or bike as a normal part of everyday life. We need the parks and the trails and the sidewalks and the crosswalk, and we need to make it safe and enjoyable. And of course, sustainable mobility and parks are going to improve physical health, but there is no health without mental health. Loneliness. Loneliness is a huge problem at all ages, but also older adults. It increases the possibility of heart disease, of strokes, twice the possibility of dementia. The number 1 action for Alzheimer's, by far, according to all doctors, is physical activity. The Surgeon General of the US that was just appointed says that loneliness is the equivalent of smoking 15 cigarettes per day. Depression is the world's leading cause of disability. And if we have contact with nature, it's going to improve our mood, our cognitive attention. So we need to have that contact with nature. It's absolutely critical as a normal part of every day. If we have green neighborhoods, it's going to lower the depression, the anxiety, the stress. So it's not just because the neighborhood looks beautiful, and it has to be equitable because the wealthy neighborhoods usually have very good tree canopy and parks. The low income, very few. Equity is critical. Equity is very, very important. And we need to have the trees everywhere. We need to have nature at home, on the street, on the streets, on the school, on the places of work. We need to have it everywhere. Older people want to age in place. So we are at from a horrible situation, we have seen opportunities. All of a sudden, we saw that with fewer cars, people started doing protected bikeways all over the world. But networks, one protected bikeway doesn't solve anything, because if now 30% of the ride is safe, but 70% is not, people are not going to use it. People needed to walk physically separated. The sidewalks were too narrow, so we had to use streets. And places like Oakland, California, in 24 hours, they turned 115 streets, 115 kilometers or 115 kilometers of streets into slow streets. What is a slow street? Only the cars of people that live in that block can go in, no one else. And even they have to go in at 8 kilometers per hour, at 5 miles an hour. It's great. Now we see people on wheelchairs, people blind, people with mental and physical disabilities, children, youth, all kinds of people enjoying less noise, better quality of it. Also, we're doing bus-only lanes, markets on the streets. Remember, the streets, if we look at any city from the air, the streets is 30% of our city. And that's public space. It belongs to everyone. We've seen golf courses in San Francisco overnight being turned into parks. So instead of 200 people playing in one day, thousands and thousands and thousands of people are enjoying it. All of a sudden, the impossible became possible. And we are celebrating, but we need to do more. Now, Paris has just said that even the Champs-Élysées, half of it is going to be green, and trees, and the city's transformed. Nature is critical. We're living longer, not longer, much, much longer. Our body's aging, but not our spirit. The new 60, people that have ever lived to 60 in the history of humanity, half are alive today and are gardening and eating ice cream and enjoying their children in the park, in the middle of nature. The people over 60 is going to double in Canada. The people over 80 is going to quadruple. Remember this slide, 25 years. We need to really, our third act is, because the first act is from, since we're born till around 20s, the second act from the 20s to the late 50s, and then our third act over 60. That is a full third of our life. But society, when people turn 60, society cross people out as if they had died, except that they got 30, 40 years left. And we should be able to find ways to live healthier and happier. Everybody, regardless of the background or the ethnicity or the economic. I mean, Canada, we doubled the life expectancy in the last 200 years. We learned to survive. But when we got all of these issues of health and climate change and so on, we must learn how to live. And learning how to live, nature is right there, because a lot of this is the built environment. The built environment, we need to build it with trees and plants and green areas everywhere, because it's going to be good for everything, including economic development and the environment and physical and mental health. And it's not only about walking. Older people, we want to garden and knit and yoga and dancing and reading and bird watching. So activities is critical. We need programs. It's not just about doing a walking path. We need to have the walking groups. And it's not just about benches and walking paths. We also need restrooms and drinking fountains. And restrooms 52 weeks of the year. It's not that they are closed for the season. So this is simple, this is doable, this doesn't cost a lot of money, and it's completely doable in any city of any size. Every older person should have a park within a short walk. Also enjoying the beauty of intergenerations. Now that I'm a grandfather, I love going to the park with our grandchild. It's magnificent. So we got every children playground should have a nice cozy area for parents and grandparents, so that they both, the child and the grandparent, and also the great-grandparents. Now we're seeing 3 and 4 generations at the parks at the same time. So we need to change. I want to end just by saying there's not going to be a Martian coming down to say, I will create communities that are healthier and happier for older people. No, let's put on our magnifying glasses. Let's focus on healthy, equity, and sustainable communities. I know that change is hard. That's why we don't change, because doing more of the same is easier. Keep in mind, change is not unanimous. The general interest must prevail over the particular. And the cost of doing nothing is not nothing. We need to change. So these are not technical issues. These are not financial issues. It's about policy, but it's not about any political party. All political parties should be focused, should be interested that in our third act, we live healthier and happier with a big P. Everybody needs to participate. So take some air, dream of the river, of the water that Janet told us, and be bold. Let's be ambitious. Let's do alliances with everybody, the school, so that they open and we can go in and use facilities at night or Saturdays or Sundays. We need to develop a shared vision of the cities that we want, but action, action, action. And if we have a shared vision and lots of action, we're going to move from talking to doing. And older people are going to live healthier and happier in cities that are more equitable and more sustainable. Thank you. So Canadian cities, let's do it now. Thanks.
Oh, Gil, can you take us back to not sharing your screen? Wow. Bravos in the chat. I don't know about anybody else, but we just got to get up. We got to get up and we got to go and we got to demand all of this. And if we were at the Canadian Ecology Center for this event, I would just say, you know what, we're now going to go outside and we're, going to continue this while walking and jumping and canoeing and just being active. So you've got me so jazzed. And the combination of the two of you, because Moira, the subtitle of your book is Revolutionary Approaches to Long-Term Care. So urgency is what I feel from you, Gil. And so if this can be the prompt to the two of you to join forces and maybe start with you, Moira, as a way to talk about, what you have investigated, what Gil has researched and seen around the world, and where we're going for our third act. How can we make this change, Moira? Like what, I know your book is like this blueprint for change. So I put it to you instead of me, I'm so excited.
So we need to raise our voices now. This is a time of reckoning, and we've had the pandemic. It has exposed all the flaws that have always existed, for example, in long-term care. And when I talk about long-term care in my book, I'm using what everyone describes as the European sense of the word, which is not just nursing homes, but looking at the continuum of care. I do have a focus on nursing homes because it has been my obsession for many, many years to try to fix that system. But I also expand and talk about day programs that are enriched and enable people to delay the entry to long-term care and help their families with respite as well, so they can go and have a hike during a day if they want to, or go to work, for example. And also I look at new ways that the first wave of the boomer generation is starting to live in terms of community living, and that would be co-owned housing, such as the Golden Girls in Port Perry, and also the NORCs, they call them, NORCS, so naturally occurring retirement communities. And those could be simply a couple of floors on a condo building where everyone gets to know each other and simply ages at the same time, and they decide to share some supports, personal support workers perhaps. Interestingly, I've heard stories of people who are reaching sort of they're the first wave of the boomers, and they've decided to buy on one floor, new build condos. So a group of friends goes in and buys these condos. They're all living on the same floor. So they have lots of social connections if they want them, but they also have privacy. And then they plan, if it's ever needed, to, go in together on a personal support worker if that day ever comes. And so I think there are a lot of different options right now, but this really is a time when we have the attention of the federal government and the provincial government. And personally, from what I've seen, I've been writing about these issues for about 20 years now. If we don't act now, I'm not sure that the opportunity will come again to really create real change. This is top of mind right now.
Sorry, mute, unmute. I try not to have my paper shuffling. Gil, what are your thoughts on what Moira has said?
I totally agree with Moira. I think that this is not a technical issue. I think that everybody should get this book and read it and share it. And if you have a little bit of money, please buy one and send it to your councilor, to your mayor, because they need to read it as well. The reality is that Canada, we can be as good as anybody. We don't have any excuse. We are one of the wealthiest countries in the world, one of the best educated. So we should be benchmarking with the best, because one of the problems sometimes we benchmark with countries that are worse or with cities that are worse than us. And then we feel good in the short term. But if we benchmark with cities that are worse, eventually we're going to look like those. So we should be benchmarking with the best. Which ones are providing the best level of physical health, of mental health? Which one has the best tree canopy, the best park system? And so the older adult, we need to compare with everybody. Which one has the best education? Older adults are hungry, but of knowledge. People want to take courses. For example, we have such magnificent university as U of T, and practically has no courses for older adults. It's shameful. They have one course that has a wait list of 1,500 people. 1,500 on the wait list. What are they waiting for? That is a symptom that they could easily have 100 courses with 30 people each. We need to move. So also something else, Jared, many people, when you talk to your elected officials, they're going to say, oh, but we don't have the money. No, this is not an issue of money. I'll find you $7 billion in 30 seconds, 7 billion. One, we have an elevated highway in Toronto called the Gardiner East that is falling apart. Two options. One is to tear it down and rebuild it. Tear it down and do a boulevard with sidewalks and trees and protected bikeways, 500 million. A second option is to fix it, 500 million. But mayor and council came up with the crazy idea that they call hybrid. They're going to tear it down and move it over. It's going to cost $2 billion. $2 billion. That is half of the budget that Toronto has for capital budget for transport in the next 10 years. Half of it, of the budget that is for streets, for sidewalks, for byways, for everything. Half of it is going to be just for this little bit of Gardiner that is going to save to 2% of the commuters 3 minutes. It's still time to change our minds, but the council just approved the budget for this year, didn't do any change. So we could save easily $1.5 billion there. At the provincial level, we're building a light rail, a train now above ground on Eglinton. The premier Ford says now, oh, I want to put it underground in the west side. What? The same train, the same stops, everything, except that going underground instead of at level is going to cost $2.6 billion. $2.6 billion. And the third example is there was a plan fully funded to do a 20-stop light rail, which is trains above ground. And then the mayor and council and the premier said, oh no, we gotta do one-stop subway. Now they say 3-stop subways. So instead of costing $2.5 billion, it's gonna cost $7.5 billion. I mean, with those 3 examples, we could end up with much better projects, much better. And on top of it, save $7 billion. How are we allowing this craziness? It doesn't make any sense. So when we are talking about the long-term care homes and the financial crisis, it's not a financial crisis. It's a political crisis. It's a priority crisis. And like so many people have that, which is shameful. I mean, Canada, we have probably the highest death of people in long-term care homes of all the developed countries, of all of them. Over 80% of the deaths in COVID are in long-term care homes. And not only the first wave, when we didn't know what to do, same thing happened in the second wave, where supposedly we should have known what to do. What is happening? Imagine that a small fraction of those people dying in long-term care homes had been children or adults. What would have been the reaction of society? But since they were older, then people say, oh, they were going to die anyway. Well, with that kind of thinking, everyone is going to die anyway.
It seems to me that the intergenerational plan or layout, Moira, and thinking, of course, Gil, you're a grandfather, and that not only the urban planning that is required to take into account kids 8 people to 80, that 880 cities design, but with intergenerational living that bridges the gap to the communication that, elders out of sight, out of mind, instead of being valued. And Moira, in your book, you have the student and the example in Humanitas. And would you speak to that a bit more, whether, that example you want to talk to a bit to fill that out, or other intergenerational models you saw?
Yes, absolutely. That is actually an early example, I think, of the way that people are moving. So in a city called Deventer in Amsterdam, or in the Netherlands, there were housing issues for students. They have a lot of schools there, but they did not have enough affordable housing for students coming in to rent. So one of the homes sort of looked at that problem and thought, hey, here's a solution that will actually benefit our residents. This was a seniors home. And so they decided to offer free rent to students in return for their social, their time, basically, and their charm, I guess, is one way of putting it. And so the students spend a certain amount of time every month chatting with residents in the home. And when I went, I met a young man who was about in his sort of mid to late 20s, and one of his closest friends as a senior was a woman who was 94 years old, and she still drove. And so they would go, he would ride shotgun with her, and they would go off together and go to flea markets, because she loved to collect like old doll carriages and then put different wheels on them and paint them. And her room was full of this clutter, what they call in one of the programs I wrote about, the stuff of life. And so in many homes, for example, in Canada, she would never have been allowed to have that clutter or that stuff of life in her room. But in this home, she was allowed to. But when I was visiting with them, they were laughing away in the corner. And I remember taking notes, and the manager who was with me said, don't make this a big deal. This is just normal, just 2 people talking. And it was so interesting, because this guy in his 20s and this woman in her mid 90s were talking about this upcoming beer pong party that they were planning, which is a game anyone who has university age kids or may remember themselves. It's a pretty lively drinking game, I think. And apparently, if you're sitting on in a chair or on a walker, it helps with your aim. So she had the benefit, I think, of that one. But it was just a lovely interaction between young people in their 20s who might not have otherwise had a connection to older people, and they just realized we're all the same.
Well, and I love it that. Sorry, Gil, were you going to say something?
Oh, just to compliment, I think that one thing that didn't work was when people were putting the older people in one place and the younger people in another. Everybody wants to be together somehow in the cities. For example, 2 years ago, before the pandemic, I did some work in Arizona, where a lot of the long-term care home or the adult communities were created 30 years ago. And most of them have gone broke because people didn't want to live just with adults, that they had a lot of restriction on children. For example, I saw some beautiful buildings for older people in the middle of the University of Arizona. And they were a huge success, because older people, whenever they wanted to be only with older, they could be, but also whenever they went to the Starbucks or they went for a walk, they also wanted to meet the students and meet with people of other ages. Something else that I saw, I was invited to work with the Desert Botanical Garden of Phoenix, and it is a beautiful desert. They had 550 volunteers over 60 years old. This is magnificent. One of the things that older people, we want to give back. Also, we want to have a purpose, and we want to leave a legacy. And these volunteers, the people who volunteer from 2 to 5 days, whatever they wanted to, they gave them beautiful uniforms with nice jackets and everything. They trained them, they learn, and they become very capable. And it was a win-win, because the botanical garden could have never paid 550 people. And these people also had a purpose during the week. Many of them, that when I spoke, they said that was their best days of the week, were the days that they were volunteering. So I think this is 2 examples, one of volunteering and giving back and being active, but also the dorms in the middle of a university, because older people wanted to be with students and also maybe get into courses and classes and whatever. But mixing of generations is very important.
I am the Humanitas example was being created in Toronto with the Home Share Toronto program, of which I signed up for because my son moved out, and it's like I have extra room, and I thought, oh my goodness, to have a student in my house and help them out with rent in an unaffordable city. And then the pandemic came, and so that program, for me, I was kind of like, I don't feel comfortable proceeding with this at this point, but I'm glad that that's available here. But that's one thing. I wanted to move into, before I have memory loss. Moira, in your book, you talk about labels. Instead of labeling dementia, in the one facility, they have a memory loss committee, because if you called it the dementia committee, nobody would want to be on it. And the different layers of memory loss that we all start experiencing, whether or not we're older. I've had memory loss forever. But do you want to talk about maybe the vocabulary that we use? Because so many of the places that you visited had, titles really reflecting the care that staff gave to residents and things like that. Can we start with that subject?
It was really interesting in Carroll Woods, which is a very inclusive community. Their goal is to allow, or I shouldn't even see, I just used the wrong word. Allow is not a good word to use. They're enabling people with cognitive impairment to coexist in an open, free way with others who do not have it. So they did have this memory loss committee, but they also spoke about just the words that people use. And I will say one thing. I was speaking with someone who does have early dementia, and she uses the word dementia. So I was trying to be very careful with my language, and she just went straight to it. And so I'll just share that perspective with you from someone who has it. But also in the Sherbrooke Community Center in Saskatoon, they have, again, another very inclusive philosophy there. And they use a philosophy called the Eden Alternative as well. But the CEO of that home talked to me about the importance of language. And so now in long-term care homes, people will say somebody with cognitive decline is a wanderer. And because they're walking, they're seeking something. They will often go into someone's bedroom. So other people go in and take things from someone else's room. They call them shoplifters, for example. Those are not, those are very negative terms. And they're actually labeling someone in a very negative way, when really it's the system in which they're living and struggling to survive, this very antiseptic institutional way of life that is creating these types of behaviors. So people, the theory is, who are walking a lot are actually, again, seeking something. So if you give them a purpose, an activity or something that they actually find fulfilling from their earlier career, that walking stops. And the same with the so-called shoplifting, which is a terrible term. If you allow them to bring stuff, so to speak, into their room, maybe they want to collect things that makes them feel at home, that reminds them of their own home in their adult lives. So enabling people to do that takes away those, again, so-called behaviors that people have, which is a whole other term that people use, which is now considered negative because the behaviors people now believe are created by the negative system, not by the human beings.
And Janet, I think now that you were saying that you were gonna forget something, your memory. You know, something that I recommend everybody, this magnificent book, Successful Aging by Daniel Levitin. He's a Canadian doctor, a professor at McGill. And if anybody wants, I'll write it on the chat. He's a professor at McGill and also at Stanford, half a year at one, half at the other. His father is 92 and is a professor at U of T. One of the things that he says, and he has lots and lots of research on it, is that people lose very, very, very little memory. It's almost imperceptible for most people. He says that when he's teaching class at McGill, very often someone will raise their hand, and if he takes 5 minutes to point, once he points, people say, oh, I forgot what I was gonna ask. But since he's a 20-year-old, people say, oh, he has too many things on their mind, or maybe they didn't sleep well enough. But if the same thing happens to a 70-year-old, we immediately say, oh, it's a senior moment. It's such horrible ageism. And then he says, the biggest problem why people forget is the lack of sleep. That's why in my 5 actions, one of them, which is very important, is to sleep 8 hours. Because all of a sudden there is the wrong belief that older people don't need as many hours of sleep. So people end up sleeping 5 and then they wake up. Everybody wakes up, and maybe as we age, we go to the bathroom more often or more times. But then people stay awake because they said, oh, older people don't need as much sleep. Well, if you only sleep 5 hours, you're gonna have a lot of problems with memory the next day. If you are 20 years old and you only sleep 5 hours, you're still gonna have problems. But the other thing is that he said that with the people with dementia, he said, yes, about 10% of the people will get dementia. The other 90% are gonna get psychology dementia, because whenever we forget the keys or we forget a name, oh, what is that person's name? Then we say, oh, I'm getting it. No, but also the people with dementia can live healthier and happier. For example, doing work in Toyama, Japan, in Toyama City with the mayor, he took me to a park in the center of the city. And he said, many people have family members with dementia, and when they would go to work, they would lock their family member so that they wouldn't go out and wouldn't get lost. He said, no, now they bring him to the park and they leave him at 8:30 in the morning. They go to work, and people can either do any of the activities that we have programmed, or they can be on their own. They can just walk or fish or do whatever they want. At noon, when they come for lunch, if they don't know where they are, every person gets a bracelet with a GPS. So they look on the phone and they find them. And it's a way of allowing people with dementia to be happier. The issue is not if we are happy because, oh, I'm so sad because now he or she doesn't know who I am. They don't know that I'm their son or their daughter. That's not what should make us happy. It's not if they recognize us. We should go beyond that and say, how can we make our father or mother or brother or anybody that we love and has dementia, how can we make them those years of their lives also healthier and happier within their possibilities? So I also think that learning from others is really good. And Moira's book has lots and lots of examples of different cities, and also within Canada and the US, lots of successful examples that we could learn from.
I absolutely agree. I want to divert into freedom, although I think everything we've been talking about is freedom. That is not provided to our seniors, talking about locking and the facilities and so on. And in your book, Moira, you have something that jumped out at me, and it was, I'm just going to read it. No matter what the age, there's no end to the human desire for independent movement. Even if it is slow and excessively cautious, it is still personal freedom. And with freedom comes some risk, which a great many advocates are starting to believe is preferable to the alternative. Which loops back to something you started with, Moira, about the fellow at Carroll Woods who was out in the forest. And at Carroll Woods, they talked about forest bathing as well. And so if the two of you, and Moira, if you want to start about freedom, and like you say, that advocates are seeing that freedom is more positive than what has been done, albeit it's still slow. So perhaps thoughts on that and thoughts on why it hasn't been embraced more.
In long-term care specifically, there is what has been described as a surplus of safety. So people bend over backwards to keep people safe, which means that they don't walk. It means that they sit in a chair all day. It means that they do almost next to nothing, because that way the home is not at risk of being documented for falls. So at the beginning of my book, I wrote about my father, who was quite frail, but very fast moving and still very agile. And he would walk with his walker to the grocery store, which was several blocks away. And I would always think, oh my gosh, but he would not be denied. And that kept him very healthy, those walks. And so there's this real belief now that we should accept a little bit of risk, because with risk actually comes a life worth living. And so this is where a lot of the progressive homes are going. And they're really sort of pushing away from the belief that you should stay in this locked unit with a locked door. Now, most of those homes still exist, but what happens is people are seeking freedom. They're seeking a way out. They can't understand why they're pushing at this door. Who's on the other side of the door? Why can I not leave this room? And so it creates a lot of anxiety. If they just open the door and let people walk through, they would enjoy a nice stroll, even if it is in the interior of the home. And that incredible anxiety that is built up, that most of us would feel, is diminished. So it really is about allowing people the freedom and also changing the structure of the buildings in which we live.
You know, Janet, we need to create cities that are safe for everybody. If we create cities that are great for older people, they are going to be good for everybody. So it's not that if we create it great for older people, then they're going to be bad for all. No, they're going to be good for everybody, whether they are 40, 20, 10, 5. So that's why we should make an emphasis on this. But for example, in Toronto, a person driving a car hits a person walking every 4 hours. Every 4 hours, 365 days of the year. And a person riding a bicycle every 7 hours. And these are data reported to the police. So it is not killed, but it must be enough of a bad situation that people call the police. Every 4 hours, a person walking, every 7 hours, a person riding a bike. That is not civilized. And what has the city done? The city says, oh, we're going to do Vision Zero. Vision Zero is a program around the world to develop the speed limit and the engineering and everything so that no one should die on the streets, whether you are walking or cycling or on public transit or on cars. No one should be dying in any traffic incident. But then the city, for example, they only announce they're doing Vision Zero, but they don't put the money or the actions. So instead of being Vision Zero, it's Zero Vision. For example, you might have seen around Toronto, they're putting these yellow signs that says Senior Safety Zone begins. And 3 blocks later says Senior Safety Zone ends. What? What? A civilized city, we need a city safe for everybody. By the way, those are very ageist signs. We need to fight against ageism because a lot of people are losing their jobs because they turn 60, 62, 65. People are not being hired. People are losing all kinds of opportunities because of ageism. Older people do not need anything special to walk. Anyone with disabilities, whether they are 80 or 60 or 40 or 10, they need special. So, so we need to have more time on the crosswalk for anybody with disabilities. It's not senior safety. Also, what do you do with zones 3 blocks at a time? How are you going to arrive? Are you going to arrive on a helicopter, walk 3 blocks, and then leave? This is totally nonsense. It's ageist, it's negative, it's bad, and it reinforces a stereotype that older people are weak and fragile. And those are the small things that we need to change. A good city should have signs in the few places that is not safe, not in the few that actually is supposed to be safe. On top of that, they put up the signs and they did nothing else. No more light, no more time in the crosswalk. They didn't even paint the lines again. So these are the kind of things that we should focus to force the city and demand the city that instead of spending $600 per every man, woman, and child to move the gardener, it's $600, it's $2,000 per household to move the gardener. We should be making the city safe to walk. Older people want to age in place. All the surveys say that the majority of people, that's one of the reasons why, for example, in Denmark, when you turn 75, the people from the city come to your house. A team of people. One is from the psychology point of view. Another people is from a handyman, and they look at your house and they say, okay, you are very independent, but you might not be as independent in 5 years or 10 years. So let us help you. What is it that you need? Maybe you need to fix this, get rid of the stairs, or maybe you need better lighting, or maybe you need to adjust the restroom. So what they try to do in Denmark is for you to live in the same place, in the same neighborhood as you have lived for the past years, to live there, hopefully, till the last day of your life. But if not, as close to that as possible. So these are the things. One final comment on these examples, and that I really like. Please read the book, because no, you know why, Maura? Because it's a win-win. It's a win-win. Sometimes in the private sector, if I'm making water bottles and I charge too much money, then if I have 20% of the market and I want to get 25%, someone has to lose 5% of the market for me to go up. That doesn't happen with these issues of older adults. If Maura talks about a really good example in Amsterdam or in London or in Toyama City, and we go and look at it, it's not like on the computer that we copy paste. No, we adapt and improve. If we adapt, they don't have to get any worse for us to get better. So it's a win-win to learn from others. Today for you, tomorrow for me. So we must be very generous. And if anybody has successful programs, please invite people. Share your stories of what works as well as what didn't work, so that other people won't make the same mistakes. And you got nothing to lose by sharing best practices. So let's be generous and learn from each other.
Great advice. I'm going to read out Christine's question from the chat. It's for Moira. Christine asks, what do you wish families of elder people would do or know when they can no longer live independently?
First of all, I think that we all need to do a better job of planning for our future, and hopefully, and I'll get to your question, but hopefully that means living very well in a very active way that Gil and I have been talking about. When they can no longer care for themselves, then you're in a situation where you enter the healthcare system, and it takes quite a bit of time actually to get on a list for a long-term care home, depending on your needs. Most people who enter long-term care these days have a series of physical issues, and many have some type of cognitive decline. And often the waiting lists, especially in the bigger urban areas, are a number of years long, especially for good homes. Some homes you just don't want to go into. They do have beds available, and you should be wise to not choose those homes. So in that case, if there's family money available to care for someone in a retirement home, that's another possibility, or getting home care. But home care is is helpful. The way it's set up right now, it's only helpful to a certain extent. And then I always fear for the caregivers, especially if they're older people, because they will often become exhausted themselves trying to manage this at home. So I think it takes either a family coming together, or if somebody really needs extra help and you cannot get into long-term care, finding a way to find a retirement home, or assisted living also is possible if you can get on a wait list and actually get a unit in one of those buildings. I hope that answers your question. It's not a very definitive answer.
I'm going to, on her behalf, say yes. Gil, I would pose the same question to you in a way of, what advice in terms of when, you're in your family, someone who's an elder and can't safely live on their own anymore. What advice might you give?
Well, one of the things that I try to work a lot on is how to live healthier.
Yeah.
Because one of the things, for example, with COVID in the US and Canada, the number one factor why people died were when people had a lot of preconditions and when people were very, very old. But after that, the number two is because they were very unhealthy. The number one in the US, huge obesity. And somehow COVID had an issue with obesity that the body did not react very well and people ended up dying. So we keep talking about, and like Moira just said, plan ahead. But they're telling us all the time, we're being bombarded by commercials about finance, how to save money. And even then, maybe they're not doing it very well because a lot of people are not saving any money. But nevertheless, all the focus is on the financial savings. We should also, for example, now with COVID, the government has spent billions and billions in health care, but almost nothing in health promotion. So it's not only about, there is no health system in the world that is going to survive, whether in the US is Obamacare or Trump care, whatever, or whether in Canada is our really good health system. It's not going to survive if it's only curative. We need to work on preventive. We need to put a lot of money promoting so that people, since they are born, children are doing stretching, and it becomes like a normal part of everyday life to do stretching. I mean, we know that so many people in their 40s and 50s are getting back pain. Well, they wouldn't be getting back pain if, since they were little, they had been doing stretching. So these are some of the things. Also, if we focus a lot on eating healthier. For example, I'm not saying, when I say eat more plant-based, it doesn't mean that everybody should be vegetarian. But imagine if half of us on the call decided to eat half as much meat as we usually do, the impact would be the same as if half had become vegetarians. So there are things that we could do of eating healthier and sleeping more and being more physically active. Physical activity is kind of magical. And it's not about doing marathons. Everybody can do it, but we need the government to enforce. One is to provide, make it really easy, really simple, have trees. For example, when you look at the tree canopy in Toronto, the wealthy neighborhoods have between 2.5 and 3 times more tree canopy than the low-income neighborhoods. This is a huge equity issue. Why is it that we don't have the same tree canopy across the city? So we need to work on some of these issues because a lot of older people, in addition of having to fight against ageism basically is discrimination based on age. No one should discriminate. Like young people don't talk about politics because you are too young, or old people don't do this because you are too old. By the way, when I speak at universities, sometimes the young people say, oh, those old people, they messed up the world. They messed it up. Now we have climate change. Well, I know climate change is a huge issue, but also the older people, we've done a lot of good things. When I was born, for example, 6 out of 10 people in the world, 6 out of 10 were living in extreme poverty. That is less than $2 per day. From 6 out of 10, now is less than 1 out of 10. People with clean water. When I was born, more than half of the population didn't have clean water. Now only 8% of the population don't have clean water. So there have been some amazing accomplishments. So instead of fighting intergeneration, who's doing more good or who has done more damage, let's work together around creating a world. If we have cities that are more equitable and sustainable, everybody's going to be able to live healthier and happier. The 90-year-old, the 70, but also the 20, the 15, the 10. So this is a win-win for everybody, and it is doable. And there are some things that are more urgent than others, such as climate change, but even the small little things such as the crosswalk and the sidewalk and the light and the park and the tree. For example, allotment gardens. How is it that allotment gardens in the city of Toronto, if I went to Hyde Park and I said, I want to have an allotment garden. They say, oh, there's a 10-year wait list. What? It's a 117-hectare park and you have a 10-year waiting list. It doesn't make sense when we know that when older people do gardening, it's good for their physical and mental health. You socialize, you meet with the other people. Also for immigrants get to socialize and they talk to the other people doing gardening. Where did you get those tomatoes? Oh, I'm going away for a week. Can you water my plants and whatever? It's a magnificent way to socialize. We shouldn't have 10-year wait list to do allotment gardens when you have a park of 117 hectares. Again, is the priorities. We put a lot of emphasis on parks and recreation on the children and youth, very, very little in the people over 60. And we need that emphasis. We need those programs. We need those activities.
And I think with that, you know, going back into Moira's book, the movement, you know, this is what we're talking about, is change and changing things, and that grassroots movement to go back to nature. And in Seattle, you wrote about momentia, because it was inspired by the words moment, momentum, and dementia. And the whole thing of creating community networks for friendship and laughter and exercise. This is our common themes. If I was to create a word cloud, I think, you know, it would be all of those and more under the canopy of trees and within green parks, not parking lots. With that and that wasn't so much a question as to what you both reminded me of, but I wanted to bring up a question from Donna for you, Moira. She wants you to tell us about what you learned about the butterfly model.
Okay, that's a great question. The butterfly model is one of the models that I looked at, and I discovered that initially in 2018 when I wrote about it for the Toronto Star. Since then, the ownership has changed, the costs of the program have changed. It was quite expensive initially. It is, I am told, I don't know the exact figures right now, but considerably less so now. So what the butterfly model does is it's really good at recreating the structure of a home in terms of the transformation. So they go in and they do a lot of very intense training of the staff, and they bring everyone from the administrator to the housekeeper, the PSWs in for training sessions, in part to try to build empathy for other people so they can connect in an empathetic way with the people in their care, who many of whom are living with cognitive decline and reliving often traumatic experiences from their past or joyful experiences as well. So I watched this program unfold, and it happens very slowly. And I think initially I was there with a documentary filmmaker from the Toronto Star, and we were sort of looking at each other after several months wondering, is anything going to happen here? So this is not instant gratification at all, and that's probably a very good thing. But the staff started wearing their street clothes into work because the belief is that when you wear a uniform, that shows sort of an authority. I'm a figure of authority over you, the individual who's living here. So they sort of started breaking down these old traditions, and instead of rushing from task to task to task, and sitting at the computers, filling in your hourly documentation, which is required by the Ministry of Health, they were actually given the freedom to be individuals and to actually connect with people on a deeper level. And I'll give you an example from a home in Atlanta, Georgia, that also used the butterfly model, a much different home, but still the workers there are enabled to make decisions on their own for the emotional care of the residents. There was a woman there who did not sleep. Speaking of skills, talking about sleep, she they'd help her get to bed, and then she would appear in her nightgown in the hallway, and the next day she'd be stumbling around because she was exhausted. So one of the workers decided she was going to do something, and it was actually pretty radical what she did. And she brought in her pajamas, which is not the radical part, but she helped the woman get into bed, and then she was wearing her pajamas at the time, and then she climbed in bed with the woman and just kind of laid there with her, and the woman fell asleep. And her family was fine with this. But my understanding is that is basically she was accustomed to sleeping with another human being for most of her adult life, and now she was constantly alone, and it just seemed unfamiliar to her. So they sort of got into this little rhythm of doing this. And I think that one of the stories was that one night the staff were looking for the worker, and they went in and found her and the resident sound asleep in bed, and everyone laughed about it. So that's part of the program, is giving workers freedom to make decisions. And I could speak at length about it, but I probably should stop there. If you have any other questions, I'm happy to answer them.
Well, and your the documentary on the butterfly model is available. Is the link still on your Goodreads profile?
No, it's not, but it's called The Fix. If you just Google my name, Moira Welsh, Toronto Star, and the words The Fix, you will find it.
Okay, because it's like a 20-minute documentary, and it's fascinating, and just the simple things like painting the walls so that people are cued to where they should be going, opposed to all of these beige walls that all look the same and are boring and not stimulating at all. So yeah, no, I highly recommend that. As per time, what I'd like to do is to wrap up with a question to both of you, and then I'll put the bow on. But don't be rushed, because this is a biggie, I think. And I'm not flippantly asking you, but Moira, so you've been investigating seniors' homes for over 20 years, the neglect, the abuse, and I'm sure it must have been a relief to look at pulling together the positives into this blueprint for the future that is doable. You know, here are these examples that you've seen in North America and in Europe. And so this is a personal question to you. From all of those years of investigative reporting and from this latest research, what are your thoughts for your future? What are you from what things are you doing? And I know you're not 75, you're not 85, but I can't help but think that you haven't been influenced by where do you want to be in your future, and how can you achieve that? So help me.
Well, I hope to be 85 if I'm lucky enough, and 85 and beyond. So what I really learned when I did this book was movement. And we've been discussing this tonight. And I will say that I've spent quite like 2.5 years researching this book and working full time. So I have done a lot of sitting in that time, working on a computer. So I'm really, I feel like a bit of a hypocrite when I speak that way, but it is physical movement. And, Janet and I have occasionally gone for walks together along Humber River and see a group of people, citizens from the area, coming together and doing Tai Chi. And that seems magical to me, to actually have that time to be able to go do that, but to live with in the outdoors and staying very healthy. And I remember speaking to a senior scientist at Baycrest who was describing the impact of music on the brain, especially for people with cognitive decline, because it is very enlivening. And I told him at the end of our conversation that I wanted to go learn to play the piano from a French teacher in Montreal. So, because that really gets at your brain, learning a new language and an instrument, relearning an instrument. So I just think we need to constantly, or I need to constantly work on adapting and learning new things and talking to people. Being social is key. And most of my book is really about loneliness and eradicating loneliness through these programs, whether it's in an institution or in a community. And I think I'm going to aim for all of those pieces.
Thank you. And Gil, I think you embody and practice everything you speak of, from the movement, from the diet, to the engagement with community, to all of your 5 principles. So I don't know, is there anything else that you are considering changing so that you are a grandfather for many years in the future, and continue either living independently or co-housing or within a naturally occurring retirement community? What are your thoughts?
Well, I want to give back. I want to contribute. I'm not sure how. I wish maybe creating a movement around our 3rd act to pressure politicians, because all of this is so doable. It's not a lot of cost. And also it's a win-win for everybody. For example, I was talking about planting trees. When I've been working in Australia, for example, in Melbourne, they went through a huge planting trees, and they were able to lower the temperature by 4 degrees. You can lower the temperature of the city between 2 and 8 degrees just with planting trees. If you plant trees near the windows of the house or the buildings, you can actually lower the air condition by 30%. You can reduce the cost of heating in the winter for 30 to 45% with trees. So trees also, they're fantastic for climate change because they absorb water. If you get one of those horrible storms, the once in 100-year storms. I was in England working with older adults. For example, older people need to go to the restroom more often, and there are not enough public restrooms. So what do? They design a campaign so that retail stores that would allow people over 60 or children under 5 to go to the restrooms without having to purchase anything. And they put a sticker on the window so then people know. Instead here, for example, where I've been in Banff in the winter and in Toronto, we close all of the restrooms of the parks because for the season, we don't plow the trails for the season. We just put up a sign, no winter maintenance or no seasonal maintenance. What? We invest the millions doing the trails and the parks, and then we don't invest the cents to open them up to people. It's so good for mental and physical health to walk the trails, but we cannot walk if they are full of ice, or we cannot go to the park and stay long if the restrooms are closed. So these are some of the things that we should be working. So again, I don't think these are technical issues. You find the solution somewhere around the world. They are political. And we need to put pressure on the politicians. I think elections matter. So whenever we have an election anywhere in the world, anywhere across Canada, we need to participate, somehow raise some of these issues, because people are not changing. We saw some things changing during COVID, but many elected officials are rapidly turning them down because they want to go back to. So they have a beautiful slogan, let's build back better. But that is only like a bumper sticker, build back better. But in the end, they are going back. I've seen a lot of city budgets across Canada, including Toronto's. It has nothing different in 2021 than it had in 2019. I mean, if we're not going to be bold and ambitious in 2021, when we had such a gigantic crisis in 2020, then when are we going to be ambitious? I mean, we have some, for example, we have some golf courses, public golf courses in Toronto that are used only during the summertime by 200 people per day, 200. If we did like San Francisco and have the golf courses open up as park, in 24 hours, you could get thousands and thousands of people walking, doing picnic, enjoying. So are we gonna, is it better for what is the general interest over the particular? Is it the general interest to have 200 people or thousands? And we are subsidizing those golf courses. They're losing a lot of money. On top of that, it's bad for the environment because you use a lot of chemical to maintain the grass, tons of water to be able to do it. So these are some of the things that and sometimes when people find, oh no, but we need the golf courses. I said, what would be your evaluation if instead of saying what to do with a golf course, I was asking, what would you do with 4 cricket pitches? Instead, would you have 4 cricket pitches, or would you have half of it for parking, for housing, and the other half for a park? So in other words, there are a lot of things that are doable and are good, but we really need to be consistent. I think of course, I became Canadian. I've been in Canada for 21 years, and I love Canada. But sometimes in Canada, we think that part of being Canadian is to be politically correct. No, that is dumb. No one should be politically correct. We must be respectful. We must be respectful, but we must say whatever is on our mind. We must say whatever we're thinking. We cannot allow a premier, just because for his ego, go have an above ground train and put it underground, the same train, the same stop, the same speed, everything the same, except that underground is going to cost $2.6 billion. And besides, we need to think also about happiness and safety. If you could go at the same speed, would you rather go above ground or below? Above, you're looking at the trees, at the sun, at people, at the stores. Below ground, you see nothing. 9 out of 10 people prefer to go above ground. 9 out of 10 rats prefer to go underground. Why are we allowing this premier to waste $2.6 billion when that money could be spent in older adults and we'll get so much done with the money? Money is not the issue. It's about priorities.
Well, and I think for all Canadians from coast to coast to coast, to create that movement at the local level, and to realize that, and I look at this cover, Moira, as inspiration and a reminder that, like the rings of a tree, that life, that what is inside of us, that who we were at 5. And I was the little girl who would be dressed in red because I'd go off wandering. And my mother could always say, have you seen the little girl in red? I'm still that little girl at 50 plus who wants to go off wandering and does enjoy wearing red. And you know what? If I live to be 90, I'm still going to do that. But I want to be able and be allowed to do that. And that means my freedom and me taking responsibility for my risk. And I think, a lot of things that we've talked about tonight and what we need as people who are aging, that happens every day, we need our freedoms. We need that creativity. We need to be connected with nature. We need to, be able to be in society and be able to give back and to feel that our life has purpose. And so I reluctantly have to wrap this up. It is almost 8:30. I think I promised people an invigorating conversation, and there was something more. I have so many Post-its in your book. There was something about conversation, and that you actually wrote about, and I thought, oh my God, this is the perfect thing that I've called this, because it was about starting a conversation, and that's the key word. And so the key word with everyone who has come tonight, and thank you for carving out time in your lives to join us and to soak in so many ideas and passion and research, and I'm just I feel full. I feel super saturated. But there's a storytelling proverb. It's this: tell me a fact and I'll learn. Tell me a truth and I'll believe. But tell me a story and it will stay in my heart forever. And so thank you, Gil. Thank you, Moira, for your facts, your truths, and your wonderful stories. So with that, I encourage you to remember that wave, the feeling of remembering being in nature. Go back to nature. Let it saturate you and your thoughts and how you value it and how you want to continue being in it in your future. And let's make waves together for change. We can be the tsunami. So with that, I'm so thankful you helped create a connection with our natural world through the stories, ideas, and passion. I want to thank the series sponsor for today and then April. And I have to do a quick cut and paste for the spring series, which is ECW Press, which without them, we would not be here. And Liam Guy, who's been my co-pilot. It's so fun to have a co-pilot. I feel very special tonight. I also want to remind you this has been a fundraiser. The link is in the chat. Please give for the Kids Education Foundation. If we don't have kids in nature, they're the ones that get invested in it, and they're the ones that are going to help continue protecting it. And I want to remind you that next month, we have our second In Conversation, which will be about kids and nature, which is falling during Earth Day week. And it's going to be with Backroads Bill Steer, AKA Bill Steer, originator of the Canadian Ecology Center, with the author of This One Wildlife, who is Dr. Angie Abdu, who I think is within our group tonight. So thank you for joining us, Angie. And gosh, thank you again, Moira and Gil.
Janet, a short comment. When you said the tsunami,
yes?
just an anecdote to end. I was invited to speak to about 2,500 people in Minnesota to a Congress on older people. And the Congress, the theme of the Congress was the Great Tsunami. So when I started speaking, I said, thank you very much for having me here. What a wonderful place, but what a horrible name. I said, because this is not a tsunami. Why? First, because the tsunamis are very negative, and living longer is very, very positive. I mean, I just mentioned in Canada, we're living 25 more years than 100 years ago. And number two, because the tsunamis are totally unpredictable. They come out of earthquakes and we don't know when they're coming. Instead, this aging population, we knew it. There is nothing as simple to predict as aging population. Whoever is in their 50s now, 10 years from now is going to be in their 60s. And the people in their 60s are going to be in their 70s. So we knew the baby boomers were coming 60 years ago and then 50 and 40. So if we are not ready, it's not because of lack of knowledge. It's not because all of a sudden we were surprised with all of these people living longer and with the population growing so much. It's because we just did not care. We did not pay attention, and like they said, the best time to plant a tree maybe was 20 or 30 years ago. The second best time is today. The same thing with older people. The best time to have done those magnificent places to age would have been 20 years ago. The second best is today. So let's not lose that opportunity.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And thank you, Moira. Any last word from you?
No, I hope that people, if they're interested in pursuing these issues, that they get in touch with their local member of parliament or get involved in a family council. There's the Family Councils of Ontario. I spoke to them this morning, actually, and they're very active in promoting many of these issues. So there are ways to take your energy and channel it for change. And by bringing voices together, there is power in that. So I'm hoping that we can all really push and create some action around these issues.
Thank you. And so it is time to bring this to a close, but it's not a close. This has just opened up, I hope, more thoughts for everyone and more discussions and more conversations. So may peace be with you and good night.
Thank you.
Thank you.